Count 5, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years.
The 7 defendants were members of the Gun Trace Task Force.
I'm Sergeant Wayne Jenkins of the Gun Trace Task Force. I'm Sergeant Wayne Jenkins of the Gun Trace Task Force. Sergeant Wayne Jenkins of Gun Trace Task Force.
The former ringleader of the Baltimore Police Department's Gun Trace Task Force and one of its investigators were sentenced to federal prison. Wayne Jenkins, 37, pled guilty to robbery, racketeering, and civil rights violations in connection with the drug planting on 2 men in 2010. Jenkins, the GTTF corruption mastermind, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The court divided the difference between Jenkins' request for 20 years and the government's request for 30 years. The court declined a moderate punishment, noting Jenkins' status as a drug dealer with a badge as one of its reasons. He admitted to putting poison in our community when he should have been protecting the community. Deterrence is important, U.S. District Judge Catherine C. Blake said at her sentence. "I am so sorry, Your Honor. I am so sorry to the citizens of Baltimore," Jenkins sobbed in court before his sentence. Jenkins said of the GTTF crimes, "I know it's my fault. I know I have to be punished." Jenkins was a police department specialized unit commander. His offenses of robbing drug dealers, stealing and reselling narcotics, and committing overtime fraud lasted at least 7 years. He was the commander of the Gun Trace Task Force when 8 of its members were charged. Jenkins apologized to the family of Elbert Davis, who was murdered after a vehicle pursuit initiated by Jenkins and 2 other police officers in 2010. It was eventually revealed that narcotics were put in the target vehicle to justify an unnecessary police pursuit. "I wish I could take that day back. I am so sorry. I deserve to be punished," Jenkins added. Jenkins' 25-year jail term was deemed fair by Davis's family members. "Every day it still hurts that my parents were taken from me in the fatal car crash, and my mother barely survived that crash, and 7 years later, we found out that corrupt cops who swore to protect and serve were nothing more than criminals," said Davis's daughter, Shirley Johnson. Johnson said that she had not heard from Jenkins prior to his sentence. Jenkins denied placing the pills in court, but Davis's daughter, Dolores Davis, claimed Jenkins was more worried with the narcotics at the site of the collision than her father's injuries. The main thing he was doing was having a bag of drugs, running around saying, "We got drugs on the guy, we got drugs." And my main thing was, why weren't you trying to get an ambulance or a helicopter there to take my parents to the hospital? Dolores Davis said. He kept saying he was sorry, but my belief is that sorry is just words. Jenkins said that another officer placed the narcotics in the 2010 case, but he did not identify that person. Jenkins is one of 3 cops that participated in the traffic stop. A 4th person was summoned to the site carrying narcotics. Jenkins' federal jail term was not immediately known. It might be far from Maryland. Jenkins' counsel said that Jenkins was recently beaten up in a local prison by a fellow inmate who knew he was a police officer. Michael Dotro, a former Edison police officer who plotted a series of vengeance plans against people who crossed him, including fellow cops.
Everyone to understand where I'm coming from with regards to this, especially if there's going to be any appellate review of this sentence. I want those judges to know.
Was sentenced to 20 years in jail for firebombing his supervisor's house. The reality is that this person took his position as a police officer and turned it into a nightmarish storyline, said Superior Court Judge Pedro Jimenez before passing sentence. His time as a police officer was a complete fraud. Dotro, 40, of Manalapan, will spend 17 years in jail before becoming eligible for parole as part of a plea agreement he reached with the prosecutor's office, which ended 2 arson cases and a slew of misconduct counts. Dotro, an Edison police officer for 10 years, will also be punished on a separate payback plan after breaking his probation by intimidating a witness scheduled to testify at his trial. Dotro's attorney, Robert Norton, requested the court to sentence his client to the lowest possible term under the plea agreement, suggesting that Dotro may be rehabilitated. Assistant prosecutor Russell Curley said Dotro's vengeful plans, including the May 2013 firebombing of now Deputy Chief Mark Anderko's home, while his family was inside, shamed the oath he made as a police officer. Dotro acknowledged setting fire to his then-captain's home the day before opening statements in a trial in which he and his wife were charged with cutting a woman's vehicle tires. As part of the settlement, he pled guilty to 1 count of attempted murder and arson in the fire, sneaking up on a home in the early morning hours while everyone was asleep, and knowing that other people were in the home. That is depraved, there is no doubt, Jimenez added. Dotro made a concerted effort. According to authorities, the officer was enraged with Anderko, who had moved Dotro's shift days before the fire, and ordered him to undergo a fitness for duty examination with a psychologist after his 11th excessive force complaint. The plea agreement also brings the case against Dotro and his wife to a conclusion after the former officer pleaded to 1 count of official misconduct. Dotro was accused of cyberbullying a police officer, slashing her tires, and unlawfully accessing the department's computer database concerning the incident. Dotro was also accused of purchasing and concealing marijuana and paraphernalia in his police bag, as well as forbidden weapons such as a blackjack and brass knuckles. As part of a separate agreement with the prosecutor's office, his wife, Alicia Dotro, who faced more than 21 years in jail in the trial, was accepted to pretrial intervention. If she successfully completes the 2-year program, the accusations against her, which include drug charges and lying to investigators, will be withdrawn. According to New Jersey Advanced Media, the pair had been operating a successful restaurant in Freehold, Alicia's Bistro, before the charges were filed, and they gave an interview to the Asbury Park Press in which they identified themselves as Michael and Alicia Francis. Mike claimed to be a former restaurant manager, while Alicia claimed to be a nurse who wished to operate her own restaurant. Earlier this year, the couple's lawyers argued that Michael Dotro's travel limitations should be lifted so that he could traverse state borders to pick up supplies for the restaurant and transport his wife to an out-of-state post-stroke care facility. Dotro also acknowledged witness tampering in the days leading up to his and his wife's trial.
So that they can go back home to their family and lead a normal human being life. Because the life of a police officer is not a normal human being life.
Daniel Holtzclaw is a former Oklahoma City police officer who was sentenced to life in prison. For the victims, cops, and lawyers who worked on the case for a year and a half.
Count 5, procuring lewd exhibition. Defendant is guilty of the crime of procuring lewd exhibition, and punishment is set at 5 years.
Holtzclaw's 263-year jail sentence is a welcome relief. Lead Detective Kim Davis said that she held the victim's hands throughout the investigation. "It's exactly what I wanted," she said of the phrase. "I wanted to make sure he didn't get out, and I'm satisfied." Sherry Dickerson, a victim advocate, had been in the courtroom throughout the trial. When she heard his punishment, she wanted to leap for delight, but she also expressed worry for Holtzclaw and his family. "His choices have resulted in the destruction of his life," Dickerson said. "I have empathy for his family. I hope he is able to be rehabilitated and possibly, if there is any good, that he can mentor other sexual predators to change their habits and lifestyle." Holtzclaw, 29, fixed his gaze on the 3 victims as they read their impact statements, but they never glanced back. The family of Holtzclaw has kept quiet. His father, Eric Holtzclaw, said he has many friends in the Enid community who believe in his son's innocence, and he hopes someone would come forward and say it was all a hoax. Scott Adams, Daniel Holtzclaw's attorney, broke his silence regarding the case for the first time since the trial began. "It's a tough case from the beginning," Adams said. "We knew it was what it was when we started with it, and Daniel maintains his innocence." Adams said that any further appeals will be heard by a higher court. Holtzclaw's sentence is constructed in such a manner that he will almost certainly never be eligible for parole. He forfeited his right to remain in a local jail.
Mr. Holtzclaw, this jury finds you guilty of the various counts. You will be remanded to the custody of the Oklahoma County Sheriff for formal sentencing set January 21st, 2016 at 10 o'clock a.m.
And he might be transported to prison. Because of his previous employment as a police officer, he may be sentenced in another state. Holtzclaw, who was convicted on 18 of 36 sexual assault counts, will have a deadline to submit appeals and motions once his record is complete, which might take several months. According to Florida Department of Corrections records and victim notifications, Zachary Wester, the infamous North Florida deputy convicted of planting meth on unsuspecting motorists, has been sent to an out-of-state jail far from home. Wester, a former Jackson County deputy, was sentenced to 12.5 years in prison after being convicted on charges of racketeering, official misconduct, fabricating evidence, and false imprisonment. He was held at the Jackson County Correctional Facility in Mariana, the same place he took his victims after setting them up on drug charges, before being transferred to state custody.
The court is going to go ahead and take Mr. Wester into custody. He will be put in custody. He will be transported to the Jackson County Jail, and we will talk about his sentencing date on Monday.
Victims were notified that Wester had been transferred from a state facility in Lake Butler that initially houses new convicts to another facility in Hawaii, according to a notification from the Florida Victim Information and Notification Everyday System, the VINE system. This email is to inform you that Zachary Wester, with offender number G91136, was transferred from reception and medical center to the custody of an out-of-state facility in Hawaii, the notification says, adding that your registration has also been transferred. You will continue to receive updates about this offender. It's unclear whether he was transferred or whether his final destination will be off the mainland. Hawaii's victim notification system shows him in custody at the Saguaro Correctional Center, a private facility outside Phoenix, Arizona, that houses Hawaiian inmates. A representative for the Florida Department of Corrections could not immediately confirm the move, as his new prison is listed on the FDC's website merely as Hawaii. His lawyer, Ryan Davis of Tallahassee, said he was aware of the notion of a transfer for safety concerns, but had not heard of it over the weekend. Wester, a 29-year-old Sneads native, joined the Jackson County Sheriff's Office in 2016, but was fired 2 years later, shortly after the drug planting allegations surfaced. The Tallahassee Democrat broke the Wester story first, chronicling the allegations against him as well as the impact of his crimes on his victims.
Why did you feel like no one was going to believe it?
Because he's a cop.
Did you plant that syringe in Mr. Emanuel's car?
I did not.
Wester faced mounting evidence against him, including damning footage from his own officer-worn body camera and a stockpile of ready-to-plant narcotics and paraphernalia discovered in the trunk of his police vehicle. After pleading guilty to a slew of sexual assault offenses, including child molestation, a former Louisiana Sheriff's deputy, Dennis Perkins, was sentenced to 100 years in prison. Dennis Perkins, 47, was sentenced to life in prison after pleading guilty to a plethora of charges ranging from rape, child abuse photos, and video voyeurism to contaminating food with a bodily fluid, according to officials. He has no chance of being freed on parole after state prosecutors reached an agreement with him to plead guilty in order to avoid a trial that would have compelled young victims to speak about horrors that they had undergone, according to Louisiana's Advocate newspaper. Perkins had worked 17 years as a deputy with the sheriff's office in Livingston Parish, near Louisiana's capital of Baton Rouge, until his arrest in 2019. His now ex-wife, Cynthia Perkins, a former public school teacher, was also arrested. She pled guilty to lesser crimes in return for a 41-year sentence as part of a deal that would have required her to testify against Dennis Perkins if he went to trial. The Perkinses were investigated after a report to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children led to the seizure of hundreds of films and images from their house in the Baton Rouge suburb of Denham Springs. They were arrested in October 2019. The majority of the accusations against the couple included a kid under the age of 13. The duo was charged with rape, attempted rape, sexual violence, video voyeurism, and the creation of child abuse photos over many months in 2019, according to the Advocate. Prosecutors did not specify how the Perkinses became acquainted with the youngster. Dennis Perkins was the first charged with over 80 criminal counts following his arrest and was removed from the sheriff's office. Cynthia Perkins, who left her teaching post and filed for divorce after her arrest, was initially charged with more than 70 counts before reaching a plea agreement. Dennis Perkins, the former leader of the Livingston Sheriff's Office Special Tactical Squad, apologized after pleading guilty in Livingston State Court. "I'd like to apologize," Perkins said. "Jesus Christ has forgiven me, and I'm grateful for that. I hope and pray that anyone affected by this finds forgiveness and healing through Jesus Christ." According to the Advocate, a lady who made a victim impact statement in court at Dennis Perkins' hearing questioned if he cared about anybody besides himself, highlighting his sick, deplorable actions. "You will no longer have control over your victims," the lady allegedly said, adding, "I'm so thankful I don't have to sit in this courtroom with you or your attorney again." Melanie Curtin, another woman, has been serving a life sentence after a jury convicted her of assisting Dennis Perkins in raping and filming an unconscious lady in 2014.